Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Institute Ireland partner event with Deloitte Digital. And I can tell you we are in Deloitte Digital and ACNE, I should say, and I can tell you we are in for a fascinating hour of insight that the Deloitte team have developed in recent months. As you know, over the last 2 years, the role of the marketeer has changed and has aligned very much with the changing world around us. We are almost through the pandemic, fingers crossed, so understanding the landscape will be vital for marketeers to seize, I suppose, the opportunities for growth in front of them. But before I hand over to my colleague Claire, I would like to, of course, take the opportunity to maybe say a little bit about Marketing Institute Ireland to the audience, because ultimately the role of the MII is to educate, enable and empower marketeers to become the transformational leaders of tomorrow and to demonstrate the impact of marketing, not just on business, but on the wider society. And it's sessions like this and partner events like this that I believe help you on that journey. So if you're not a member of the Marketing Institute, please get in touch with the team. We have, would you believe, almost 70 hours of content that's now available on the member portal of fantastic sessions that we've had over the last couple of years from leading speakers, not just in Ireland, but across the globe. And of course, we hope to get back to physical events very, very soon, as I know we've all been starved of that networking opportunity that we're all looking for. So I look forward to that as well. So look, on to this morning, the Deloitte team are going to share a fantastic piece of work on the global marketing trends research that focuses on the key trends for growth, as I've said. The first part of the session is going to be the research, followed by an expert panel who Claire will introduce. So I'm really looking forward to this. So at this point, I will introduce you to Claire Dowling, the Creative Director of Deloitte Digital in Dublin, where she leads the UX and creative teams. And Claire's expertise covers digital transformation, proposition development, design thinking, experience design, product design, and agile delivery. That is quite a serious amount of expertise, Claire. So good morning, or good afternoon, should I say, and I'll hand over to you. Hi, Claire.
Hi, David. Super. Thank you for that introduction. Don't think I would have done as good a job myself. Thank you for that. So of all those labels, but really today I'm here to host today's fantastic session. So as David mentioned, we have a super lineup for you over the next hour, exploring some of the key marketing trends for growth. So these trends are based on Deloitte's recently published Global Marketing Trends Report, a report that surveyed over 11,000 senior marketeers across the world. We could have easily filled half a day with the insights, but rather than using more of your time, which we know is precious, we've distilled them down into some key insights, which we believe will be helpful to inform your marketing strategies and particularly pertinent for the coming year. So in terms of how today's session will work, so first we're going to be joined by Senior Researcher at Deloitte Global, Tim Murphy. And Tim is going to talk us through some of the research's emerging themes in a little more detail. We'll then hand over to Dylan Cotter. So Dylan is Director of ACNE Ireland, and he's going to lead the panel discussion. For this discussion, we're delighted to be joined by Distilled Head of Marketing, Elaine Doyle, Marketing Lead at Allianz Ireland, Mark Brennan, and the newly appointed Director of ACNE Ireland, Jimmy Murphy. Together, they'll discuss what these themes mean for their clients and organisations. If anyone has any questions for either Tim or the panelists throughout today's session, please do enter them using the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions at any time and they will be anonymous, so don't hold back. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to Tim Murphy, researcher at Deloitte Global. Over to you, Tim.
All right, thank you so much. We can go straight to the next slide, and I think David said it best. We can go one more, apologies. But we've had a pretty turbulent last 2 years, and that's really the point of this report, is to really understand what's going on in the world, and specifically for marketers, what should we be thinking about over the next 12 to 18 months. And if we go to the next slide, one thing I really want to hit home on is that because there's so much noise in this world, we really tried to take a holistic approach to the report. And we did that through 3 main sources. The first one was an executive survey, and that's 1,100 global executives across 5 different countries. And what will be really interesting, and you'll hear me bring this up a bit, is that high growth companies, which we defined as 10% annual growth or more, have actually activated these trends very differently than their lower growth and especially their negative growth peers. And I'll highlight a bit of that along the way. The next part is it's hard to have a marketing report without talking to consumers. So for that reason, we polled 11,500 global consumers. Of those, 500 were actually from Ireland, and I'll highlight a few of their results along the way. And then finally, I think this might be the most interesting part, is that we held in-depth interviews with almost 20 chief marketing officers or chief marketing adjacent officers, right? Chief customer officer, so on and so forth. And what we did is it wasn't just an interview. It was actually what we considered a co-creation process. We'd show them some of the data and ask them, are you seeing this in your world? If not, what are you seeing? And we really use that to bring these trends to life, and I'll highlight a bit of that along the way. All that to say that we came up with 7 trends across 3 different themes, and those themes are people, data, and experiences. And of course, we don't have time to go through all 7 in depth, but we will share links to the report and a number of other assets along the way. But what we will do is deep dive into 3 of these. And before I do that, I'd like to just give you a very quick flavor of all the trends, and then I'll tell you which ones we're going to actually spend a bit more time discussing. So if we start from the top with people-based trends, the first one is in purpose, a beacon for growth. And we really talk about how that we completely acknowledge that price and quality are very much top of mind attributes for consumers. However, they're becoming a bit table stakes and commodities. And I mentioned those high growth companies. Well, what we do is we actually talk about how high growth companies are activating purpose markedly different than their negative growth peers. That means that they're going beyond things like just using it to inspire products and services, but also to guide employee decision making, corporate social responsibility initiatives, brand messaging. And they're doing it in a very specific way that really relates to their customers. In other words, it's not a one size fits all for purpose. The next one, authentically inclusive marketing, that's a bit of a double click into purpose. And we talk about how diversity, equity, inclusion can't just be a front of camera endeavor, and instead it's just as important behind the camera. And then we'll talk about how high growth companies are actually activating that differently. The next one will be one of our in-depth ones, so I'll be pretty quick on this, and that's building the intelligent creative engine. We'll talk about talent models for building dynamic creative. And then we go on to our 2 data topics. Meeting customers in a cookieless world is one that we'll spend a lot of time on today. That's talking about with third-party cookies going away, how are brands responding? And then on the other side of it is designing a human-first data experience. And that's really from the customer side and understanding what type of data interactions do people actually find helpful versus, quite frankly, creepy. And then the culmination of all of these are experience topics. Elevating the hybrid experience, that talks about with more and more brands investing more in hybrid. Originally, we thought that would be completely COVID related. However, what we found is maybe COVID was the catalyst, but now brands are actually investing in hybrid to increase personalization, help people feel more connected, and they see it as an opportunity to innovate. And then our final topic that we'll spend a bit more time on is supercharging customer service with AI. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll jump right into it. We're actually going to start with one of our data topics, meeting customers in a cookieless world. So I mentioned that this one is about how brands are responding to the disappearance of the sunsetting of third-party cookies. But before we jump into that, I actually want to share a brief piece of data from our human first data experience one. And what it is I mentioned that we talked about how consumers, there's a fine line between being helpful and creepy. Well, we wanted to get a better feel for what that looked like. So what we actually did is we provided a number of scenarios to people. And an example would be something like, and these are all hypothetical scenarios, but things that we all can relate to in our real lives. So one example would be, you're talking to a friend about coffee, and then moments later, an advertisement for coffee shows up on your social media feed. And what we'd ask people is, tell us how helpful or creepy that is. We actually created then what we call the net helpful score, where we just subtracted the creepy responses from the helpful ones. And we compared that to, I'll say, more relationship-driven, maybe safer ones, right? So things like your favorite brand sends you an email about a sales offer. How helpful or creepy is that? And the reason why we did it, and I promise you this will be our most data-intensive slide of the day, so if we could go to the next one, is we really wanted to compare that. And so what you could see here is different scenarios, types of groupings. And on the top right side are very relationship specific types of experiences. And you can see that those by and large are the highest scoring ones in terms of helpful, right? So people have a relationship with the brand, they did something with that brand, and then the brand used that information to provide value in some way. In the middle are things that involve a bit more in-depth tracking, but there's at least still grounded in a brand relationship. And we can see that those still do well, maybe not on aggregate as well as the other ones. But then on that far left side, those are the ones where we just jump straight to in-depth tracking, something like active device listening, third-party cookies, geo-tracking recommendations. we could see that, and by the way, I forgot to mention, this is all data from Ireland consumers. And we can actually see, though, that these are the ones that are, by and large, systematically considered the least helpful and, quite frankly, creepy type of data interactions. And the reason why I bring that up as we jump into how brands are responding to it is I think there's a really important thing to remember here. And I think of the movie Jurassic Park. I don't know if anybody's a fan, but they say just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And I probably butchered that quote, but it's the same idea that just because we can follow somebody around today in the internet doesn't mean that people will respond positively to it without having a strong brand relationship. So under that context, if we could go to the next slide, let's talk about what brands are actually doing. So I mentioned that high growth companies are activating these trends differently. Well, third-party cookies is no different. So a few things I want to call out. One, 61% of high growth brands said that they've already started shifting to a first-party data strategy. That's in comparison to only 40% of negative growth brands said the same. But it's not just about shifting to it, it's how are you doing? And we found that high growth brands have already entered into more sophisticated use cases. So that includes things like dynamic creative optimization, programmatic media, while lower growth brands are going more towards the lower hanging fruit, which is a very natural thing, right? So like optimizing email. And what we talked about is not that actually any one's better than the other, but if we want to have a roadmap on how you get to those more sophisticated use cases and do it in a way that people will find safer, more helpful, right, more relationship driven, we want to cover a few of those points. So if we could go to the next slide. The big ones that we had is one, cultivating unique first-party data. That might mean creating more value exchange with your customers, right? Offering them more things in exchange for their data, such as loyalty programs, gamification of the information, stuff like that. The next one is building deeper relationship ecosystem partners. And that might mean that you need to look industry adjacent. So we mentioned things like large media publishers, tech giants, but it's not just that, right? It's also finding maybe brands that have a mutual interest in serving similar customers, actually working together in external partnerships. And then the final one that I think is really important is rethinking your analytics. I mentioned in the interviews, actually one CMO told us that in many ways they're actually going retro. What they mean by that is we've swung the pendulum so much to this incredibly precise targeting, right, and predictive analytics. But if we think about it, 10 years ago or so, having more cohorts, right, people with similar interests, things of that nature, they found that they can be very effective. They know that they're talking to a group of similar-minded people and that they can actually use that to create relevant relationship-driven offers. If we go on to the next slide, I'll switch to our people-related topic, and that's building the intelligent creative engine. And this one is really talking about how can we think about our talent models, both internally and externally to the organization, to just create dynamic, intelligent, creative to meet the customers that we're serving. And if we go to the next slide, there's a few things I want to call out. The first one is just something that I think is important background for us all to be reminded of that we inherently feel. It's that 63% of college-educated employees are working remotely in some fashion right now. And that obviously really increases the landscape for accessibility to talent. And the reason why I bring that up is because when we're thinking about talent models and things like that, we have a much larger pool to integrate and fill skills gaps. Which brings me to my next point. And we can go to the next slide here. When we ask CMOs, what are the attributes of their highest performing direct reports? We were a little bit surprised to see that it was more often that analytical type skills were cited versus creative skills. And that was something that we definitely dug into in our co-creation with those interviews. And it became very clear that this isn't about, hey, the pendulum is swinging so far where now we just need these analytical minded individuals. Instead, it's an acknowledgement that we need to create better team structures and team structures that integrate all of these different skill sets, be it data scientists, be it content creators, graphic designers, IT professionals, strategists, whatever it might be. And it goes by many names for these agile teams, right? We've heard agile pods. We heard maybe my favorite one is somebody referred to it as a unicorn team because no one person is a unicorn, so you need to create a team. And What it really centered around, though, is this idea that we're getting away from these linear production lines for content. And instead, it needs to be more dynamic. And one example was from a CMO from a large supermarket chain. And she was telling us that they've actually changed it where it used to be they created content around certain products, right, certain groceries. And instead, they're actually now centering it on actual individual moments of the customer journey. So it could be, put a team, an agile pod around, best maximizing reaching people on their morning commute, right? Another one could be, certain aisles that they're shopping through. How can we actually maximize that experience and understand here's the moments that matter through data insights, and now let's create content around that. We've also heard different versions of agile pods. Another one is for a large financial institution that has a lot of regional marketing pieces that they created a global hub. And the idea is that it's almost like, I'll say, crowdsourcing creative within their organization. So they'd have it where different regional markets could submit content that was really productive and really effective into this global hub. It would make sure that it met all the brand standards and everything like that. And then other markets could actually take that and integrate it into their regional areas. And then the last one that I want to talk about, and it's one of my favorite ones, is external talent models. And what I thought was really interesting is we spoke to a large electronic gaming company, and they were telling us about how they're actually completely rethinking their influencer strategy. So we know that influencers have been around for 10 years or more now, but they said that they're actually getting away from seeing them just through a myopic lens of product spokespeople. And instead, they're actually treating them almost like agency partners, where they're acknowledging that these individuals are highly creative individuals that understand their customers better than anybody else, and they're actually using that information to give them creative briefs and asking them to execute on them. So I think that those are some really interesting pieces, and I'll now transition to our final topic, our experience-based one. And we can go to the next slide, and this is supercharging customer service with AI. And just going to the next slide, what I really love about this is two different data pieces. One, from the executive side of it, right now, 20% of executives see their contact centers as revenue drivers versus cost centers. But that number is expected to double within 2 years. So I think that's really interesting because that's a complete rethinking of that contact center experience. But on the other side of it, when we polled consumers, and I'm talking specifically when we talk about consumers from Ireland, that we asked, when you're making a purchase across 8 different product categories we pulled on, so it could be automotive, it could be furniture, electronics, banking, health and beauty. We said, what was the most helpful thing for making that purchase? And it could be any number of attributes: free trials, knowledgeable customer service, customized offers, everything like that. And the number one thing was timely offers, which is usually AI driven. And the number 2 thing was knowledgeable customer service. If we go to the next slide, the reason why I love that is because these things don't have to exist in a vacuum. They actually can work very well together. And of course, there's always going to be need for chatbots, but we can actually, when people need to talk to a customer or just during a normal customer service interaction, we can actually use AI to empower that customer service agent or that contact service agent. And I'll end with just a couple quick examples that I think are really powerful. Both of them actually from the hospitality industry, although the report has a few other industries as well. The first one is, I'd say, very low-hanging fruit. It's from Crown Royal Resorts. They talk about how they have all these different moments with their loyalty program members. And that's across bars, hotels, cruises. And they first used AI to understand what are the moments that make or break an experience. And they found especially acknowledging life events, anniversaries, birthdays can make a powerful moment. So now they have it where when a customer service agent, maybe waiter at a restaurant, scans a loyalty card and they see that it's somebody's birthday, that acknowledging it with a free bottle of champagne, for instance, will make a significant difference. The last one is another hospitality company that has a lot of excursions and things like that. And they actually really focused on the contact center piece. So let's say you're trying to schedule an experience, something is wrong, you need more questions answered. You probably don't even want to call a contact center, but you do. And not only does that person now, that contact center agent, equipped with knowing why you're probably calling, But after they resolve it, they can actually understand more about your profile and say, would you be interested in this experience as well while you're going on your trip? And I think it's a really powerful way to combine service and insights together. So those are our three big topics, and I'm really excited to now pass it on to the panel because we can really dig into these. And with that note, I'll pass it on to Claire.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tim, for sharing those insights. Some amazing stuff there, and definitely some new terms for me. I really liked the creepy score and the unicorn team. But what I'm really hearing is that it's all about putting people, process, and technology together to deliver more meaningful connections or moments that matter between the customer and brand. So to dig into those topics a little more, I'll now hand you over to Dylan Cotter, Director of ACNE Ireland. Dylan is going to introduce you to our panelists and facilitate the panel discussion. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks a million, Claire, and thank you very much, Tim. That was a rich 15 minutes, and there's lots to talk about in there, and that's exactly what we'll do now. Before I come to the panel, I just want to say we've got an amazing audience. Also, we've got 100 plus marketing people from all lines of business, and you're already popping great questions based on what Tim has just said into the Q&A. Please keep doing that. Keep that coming right through to the end, and we'll get through as many of those questions as we can in our panel discussion and Q&A. And just to let you know, nobody else can see those questions. So be honest and be provocative and be yourself. So let me introduce the panel, which we're really delighted to pull together today. So we've got Elaine Doyle, who is Head of Marketing at Distilled, looking after brands like Dundeel, Adverts and Daft. And before that, she was country lead for YouTube. She was a media planning and strategy partner at Google. And she also, amongst other things, helped develop the Cully and Sully brand for 6 years. And Elaine is always one of the most honest and insightful commentators on exactly the kinds of trends that we're discussing today. So welcome, Elaine. And Mark Brennan is marketing lead at Allianz Ireland. And before that, he was head of marketing at AIB, which is a marketing team that I think everybody holds in high regard. He was head of the EBS brand. Before that, he was on the other side of the table. I don't know if it's the dark side or the bright side, Mark, in agency land. Head of Tribal DDB in Dublin, with senior stints also at London agencies, including Adam and Eve. And Mark is also a very forthright, forward-looking marketing person and always fun to talk to. So welcome, Mark. We also have a pair of Murphys, no relation to each other that they're aware of. But Tim, you've met today. Jimmy, a lot of you will also have met. He's been Chief Growth Officer and part owner of Publicis Dublin, owner of his own agency, The Hive, director at TBWA, IAPI president, Marketing Society president, and my favourite bit, he's just joined ACNE and Deloitte as director last week. So without further LinkedIn recitals, let's panelise. And the first question is for you, Elaine. So I guess on the first trend that Tim talked about, meeting customers in a cookieless world, like the end of cookies is a huge deal. It's a huge headache and a huge opportunity for everyone in marketing, for everyone on this call. But for you and the 100% digital brands that you work with at Distilled, it must kind of push you to reimagine your marketing from the ground up. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in some ways, it's driving marketers back to first principles. And I know that might sound like kind of an easy thing to say, but you know, the reality is that everything in marketing is about value exchange. And unfortunately, getting consent for first party data has a bit of a brand problem. So we're the right people to solve it. But as you say, you know, we're digital brands. Daft is 27 years old. Yeah, thanks to the incredible stewardship of the founders. Dundeel is 18 years old. They grow up so fast. I have a teenager on my hands. But, you know, everyone in this Zoom is in the business of commercial growth, and we all build products in response to a consumer need to build that growth. So it follows then that it's pretty critical that today's customers, the people using our product today, need to be tomorrow's customers for the next phase of our business growth. And I think at Daft, at Dundeal, we're releasing more products now than we have ever done. And so too does the complexity, like the more that your products grow, so too does the complexity of the online journey as well. So we need to tell customers about these new products and how to do that in a cookieless world. So it really got us thinking about the value exchange and our interaction with customers. So for example, this week we launched online offers on Daft, where people can actually put offers on houses and go sale agreed completely online. And that, of course, like it, you know, does good, nice things. It gives unparalleled transparency to the consumer, saves times for all parties. On the Dundeal side, our car dealerships want to be able to offer the solutions that they offer offline. So you can buy a car from a dealership, etc. On Dundeal. And so those solutions create value. But wherever somebody is on that journey, in the moment we are giving value, how do we say, we think we'll have valuable solutions for you in the future, and you can unlock that value by letting us reach out to you about them. And I love that the report actually, I love that the report is Irish data. I love that the report talks about cultivating unique first party data through greater consumer value, because I actually think this is all about the articulation of value. So even before loyalty programs, and you can see that in the data, like people want useful updates. So before incentives and all of that, simply getting the marketing right, effectively communicating that the potential future benefit to the consumer of allowing us to communicate with them is a big part of that. And getting consumers to volunteer information about themselves requires a compelling data proposition, and we need to create compelling touch points for data collection on our own channels. So we have a marketing job to do, really, in how we ask people to engage with us.
That's fascinating. And so this is the copywriter in me asking a question here. It kind of feels like that move away from cookies is obviously changing the relationship between brands and customers, because the value exchange is key. Does that kind of does that tend to lead to a change of tone of voice with customers because there's a bit more honesty about that value exchange, or what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely think so. I think it's a change in tone of voice. I also think that there's an opportunity for differentiation when you have that conversation. So like there's a lot of us in industries where we're all offering similar products, but actually, and I think this touches on some of the AI piece as well, or just that customer service piece, the more that you can differentiate along those lines, I think is really interesting. But it's a real, like, you know, as we're looking at all of this, the question that I'm trying to first decide is, what do we want to say? What is the value that we're creating? How do we kind of communicate that they will be this future value? And then, like, how, you know, have we made it easy for customers to see the benefits of sharing their data with us? And then lastly, how can we achieve all of that in a way that doesn't slow us down? You know, that's a huge thing in what we do. You know, we want to be the fastest and the best. So
sure, that's great. Mark and Jimmy, can I bring you in on that? Do you guys have any thoughts on, I guess, the impact of the end of cookies on that kind of relationship between brands and consumers?
I think I think it's a massive challenge, and it's a very current one as well. I do think, though, that it could spark quite the creative revolution, Dylan. Because I think if you look at, you know, the sheer volume of budget that's currently being invested in two players in the market, largely based on their historical performance, you know, but if you look at where European regulators are going, where GDPR is going, you know, large data transfers outside the EU is a major no-no. And all of a sudden, what happens if you just start to reassess how you deploy those resources, and you get to a very interesting thing. You know, Tim talked about going retro. All of a sudden, you know, does it spark in people, well, actually, hang on, to Lane's point, we're still in this business. We're still trying to add this value to customers. Is there another way of doing that? And I think smart brand teams, will be leaning into this problem and be going, oh, hang on, we've done it this way for the last 10 years, whatever it is. But actually, are there alternative ways of us doing this with customers when they have clearly flagged, the privacy and trust are major issues, with advertising, and regulators are kind of, I guess, probably doing a lot more to transform how we engage with consumers than the industry, and so I would see it potentially as, you could look at it from saying it's the next creative revolution, because you're going to have all this additional budget, and all this opportunity, and now we've got all these other spaces to play in, and I know it's in the survey, like the metaverse, and social spaces and stuff like that. And I think you have a few things moving around there that could actually lead to something quite interesting.
Yep.
I'd agree. I think it's actually going to make us get quite serious about value exchange. I think we've kind of tipped our hat to it in the past and said, oh yeah, there's some value there for consumers, and a bit of wishful thinking there as well. And I think you can tell yourself when you get some real, genuine, valuable value exchange, it's incredibly compelling. But it's hard, and it does require creativity. It's easy for marketers to go, so value exchange is a discount, and that's the way that we're going to achieve it. And as we know, commercially, that's not sustainable. So we have to, as Mark says, there's going to be opportunities for creative, but you have to apply that in a place which is a bit more complex, because that value exchange, it has to manifest itself in digital channels largely. Yeah. And therefore you've got to think about how you're linking up your communications efforts with your user experience and bring that through the whole customer journey. So I think it's great. I think it's a huge opportunity. And as I say, it takes us away from just going to the quick fix of just, coupons and discounts and stuff like that. So yeah, it's exciting times.
It's a really interesting point, because I think when you look at value exchange, I think a lot of times, it's easier for companies to make the mistake that what's important to them is important to customers. I think that's, when you ask customers, it's like, pick up the phone when I ring you, like, kind of do your basic job. And you can see it across many industries, when the basics aren't done well, there's huge customer reaction to it. And I think kind of that's a real big role for kind of marketing teams and brand teams to close that gap in businesses, to say, no, this is, this is what's important to customers.
I'd argue also,
sorry,
Mark, but I'd also argue that marketers and the marketing departments have a unique role there, because a lot of functions within business are driven by rational, totally understandably, but rational thinking. This is the way consumers behave. To get a discount, they're going to buy more, blah, 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 right? Actually, in reality, all marketers know that it's not. It's an emotional decision at the most part. And the marketing departments are the reservoir of understanding consumer behavior, as irrational as it can sometimes be. So I think marketing departments in particular have a really strong role to play here, because, maybe certainly some other functions may be a bit more rational in their understanding of how consumers behave.
Just sticking with cookies for a moment, I just want to bring in a question from the audience here. So, what impact do we think the end of cookies will have on the media landscape? Will traditional mass media benefit, or will search and social continue to grow but be used for broader messaging? I'm not sure if that comes from somebody with a horse in the media race, but what do you guys think?
I think it's hard to diminish. Like, if you think about it, the big platforms have the data, and if we're going to start targeting cohorts as opposed to individuals, then they have that data, and therefore they can build really compelling audiences with the knowledge that they have and other people don't have. So I don't think it's going to diminish. Arguably, it could even strengthen the position of the big platforms. I don't know.
But I think what I would say though is I think that the way that the way that we're currently thinking, so like at the moment we'll say, I'm thinking about like, the complete customer journey. If I'm thinking beyond, and we should be thinking beyond kind of a campaign or any of that, really the purpose, I think, of that broad reach media and all of that ultimately is to drive back to our own domains eventually and be able to harvest that first party data there. So I think that the way that we're almost thinking about the customer and the sort of ecosystem of communications we need to be able to give, we're going to start thinking about that in a media way, I would say, in that we're kind of going, okay, I'm going to launch a big campaign, reach across all of these and actually borrow some of those customers back, if you know what I mean. So it's almost like we're using that as a funnel of data just to our own businesses. So I think the diminishing piece, I think that they still absolutely have a role, but I think we have to be more, I suppose, putting a layer of and putting kind of a commercial objective in there that we're also using it to get more of this first party data so that we can begin to have those relationships with those customers.
Yeah, I think Jamie touched on something that kind of I would agree with in terms of, I think those platforms that have a large amount of first party data ultimately will do very well if they use it correctly. The big difference being at the moment is digital advertising is dominated by two players, but there are other players who have a large amount of first party data. So, you look at Microsoft, when you look at the migration to Teams, all that kind of stuff, there's a huge amount of first party data in Microsoft. There's a huge amount of first party data in Amazon. Like, there's a huge amount of first party data on the streamers and stuff like that. And I think that landscape might change, because and that would be a benefit to to the industry and probably consumers to have more than just two big advertising platforms in that space. And I think Elaine's right. They kind of they do different jobs, So
I love in the report the point around the thing that actually I found kind of thought provoking was the ecosystem. So there's publishers, but then there's also the partners that you work with. So like on Done Deal, we've finance partners, on DAF, we've finance partners and mortgages and all of that. And how do we, we're all servicing the same customers. How do we come together across some of those things? I thought that was really, that's certainly something I'm going to be thinking about over the next while.
Super. So moving on to one of the other trends that Tim whistle stopped us through, which was the supercharging customer service with AI. And this is a question for you, Mark. So I can only imagine that it was an intense challenge to kind of evolve your customer care machine during COVID. Has AI played a big part in that, or do you see AI playing a big part in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think so to date, certainly in the businesses I've been in, they haven't, but it hasn't from a customer service perspective, but that's because they're legacy businesses, with legacy systems and stuff like that, and highly regulated. And so, the implementation can be slightly longer, but going forward, I mean, I think ultimately, and Tim kind of spoke about it as well, the changing role of call center and customer service in the round. I mean, effectively, there's so much noise out there now. Consumers have so much going on in their lives, so many different, versions of terms and conditions, of documentation, you name it, that, if you look at a large volume of conversations that go into call centers currently, particularly from a service perspective, could easily be addressed if they were able to find the information themselves, or for that information to be served to them, because you can anticipate their needs, based on a cohort. Go, look, with this type of product, these kind of queries come up all the time. So let's just proactively get, email or messages to them or whatever to kind of preempt the kind of call. And I think for me, that's where AI can take a, really big chunk out of, to say, look, you generally, call a call center, when you're frustrated and you can't find what you want, or do what you want to do online, and really, from a, the call centers should be there for more complex sales and more complex problem solving. So we should be having much better, richer conversations, in the call center, and not, giving people their, their balance update, or telling people that we received a letter, that those kind of queries that can easily be done if you have a really good, simple, resilient online product, and I think that's for me where AI can play a crucial role to kind of help us anticipate customers' needs, help us serve customers in a way that they're getting exactly what they need when they need it. And when they have the more complex problems or they need to speak to a human, then actually the call center should be freer to do that, you know? So really, I would see it in the future having a much bigger role to play, but probably much more on the kind of the site, the self-service, the kind of customer service end of things further upstream, you know, because I think that can take an awful lot of downstream calls into the call center, right?
Great. Elaine, any thoughts from you on that topic?
I suppose we have a different, on a lot of our customers will say are either estate agents or car dealerships, and we, of course we've lots of users coming through as well, but while it doesn't directly relate to our business, the feedback that we get all the time is the anything we can do basically that they wouldn't need a human for, we should do it. You know, if we could give them a piece of information that they don't have to talk to somebody, they can do it, because essentially all of our customers just want to, you know, will be like, why aren't you making this easier for me? Can this be easier, etc. And I think that's a lot of it's great to hear Mark talking about that as well, because it's a prevalent trend.
Yeah.
Got a question in from the audience on this one as well. So can Tim give us more examples of where AI is being used to make human customer service better and more effective? And I guess, Tim, like one of the things I found really interesting in the report and in your summary of it today was the fact that AI is not necessarily being used. The most exciting examples are not where AI is substituting for human service. It's more where it's enriching it, and it's helping to, I guess, identify ways to add value. Back to that kind of idea of adding value.
You know, a couple things. One, I think Mark hit it perfectly, that where AI can make customer service better, especially on more complex problems, right? So things that we just want quick self-service, that should still exist, and that's beneficial, but it's when somebody does need the call. And I'll give two more examples, and I know before I gave hospitality examples, but I'll give one from insurance and one from a B2B technology company. So for insurance, and I realize this is more US based where you have to pay for private insurance, but they were talking about how when somebody calls about a policy issue, right, and that can be a real struggle for them. And so one, not only are they trying to help their individuals, their contact center agents actually respond to that, but they know a lot about that person, right? The type of service that they're going for, things like that. And they actually are able to offer recommendations both on how they can lower their policy amount, right? Things like that nature. And then actually health-based recommendations, right? Have you considered pursuing this type of treatment, that sort of thing, right? Where they work with a lot of data scientists, medical professionals to help fuel that information, to give quick tips on how they can handle it. So I think that's an interesting piece where it's kind of bringing somebody not just answering a single question, but actually understanding a more holistic picture of that customer. The next one is the B2B one. And I thought this was just a very simple, elegant solution. So, right, most times when people are calling them about one of their enterprise software pieces, it's because they have an issue, right? And they're at a point where they need that guided tour. And so not only does that person that's an expert understand that, but they can actually look and understand, hey, you might want to consider doing these 3 updates right away, even though it has nothing to do with the individual problem that they have right now, right? But they can actually then suggest that this will make a smoother, better experience with our software in the future. So that person had no reason to call about those other updates or whatever it might be, but it's because they're armed with this extra insight. They aren't just myopically focused on solving the issue at hand. They have a much clearer, better understanding of who their customer is, what they might be running into, and they can use data from tens of thousands of others' experiences to make that individual's experience better.
Super, thanks, Tim. The third trend that you chatted us through was around building the intelligent creative engine, and a question on that. And this is, I'll kind of open this to all panelists, I guess, but first maybe to you, Jimmy, because I think this applies wherever you are in the marketing world, whether you're on agency side or in a client marketing team. I guess listening to Tim talking about the challenge of getting the right mix of creative thinkers and analytical thinkers, and of getting them working effectively together. What's your experience been of that? Is that a challenge that resonates?
Yeah, and I think it's a huge challenge because I suppose I come from an agency background, and in agencies we had a traditional model, and it was like, well, we do the creative ideas and then we hand it off, and some technologist will make our wonderful creations come to life. But obviously that's just not fit for purpose anymore, and you have to have these multidisciplinary teams, and to go with that, you need a much more agile sort of working process. So I think again, it comes back to my point about, it's one thing doing magical creative ideas that you express through communications, but if it doesn't manifest in the user experience and all the way through the journey, it's just not going to cut through anymore. People are avoiding communications, and therefore, and real experience is a much broader sort of school. So I think we have to embrace this. I think it's good because I think it brings a different kind of it sort of breaks up the groupthink that you sometimes have in the pure creative, what we see as pure agency creative disciplines. When you get technologists in, and certainly some of the most creative thinking that I've been exposed to in the last couple of years has been in user experience, in the use of data, in this, what would be seen as not traditionally creative fields. So I think it's really exciting. I think it's a really sort of exciting time. And I think you need a sort of a parity of esteem between disciplines where you recognize that, look, we do this and we do this, we can all be creative. And I think that certainly it's a model that you and I, Dylan, will be progressing in the next little while with ACNE anyway.
Yes, get the plug in there.
Yeah.
And Mark and Elaine, from your side of things, with quite different brands, but as you said, Elaine, yours, while they're digital brands, they're legacy brands. They're not babies. Do you experience that kind of siloed thing that happens in a lot of older marketing teams, where there's, I guess, the data piece in particular is very siloed and very hard to kind of plug in and weave through the rest of the function?
Yeah, I think that's where marketing has a role, a kind of a real leadership role to play, because we almost need to beat down the walls over to the data side of the house. So for example, that the piece around kind of rational thinking and yourself, for me, I'll have, a small bit of data can tell us a lot about our customers, and often it could start with talking to your customers, and then you need to validate those hunches with real data, and that means coming into bringing those people into the room and talking about your hunch, and then kind of narrowing use cases, prove value quickly, and move on to the next thing, because it's all about collecting. We're talking about first party data, but actually collecting data can be costly and not necessarily value creating. And so we need to kind of investigate those use cases. Often it starts in a very traditional marketing way, which is kind of the hunch or the more emotional piece, and then using data to back that up. But I love and Jimmy used the word agility there, and I think that's absolutely critical. The more we can enable that sort of agility using the data and bringing it to the fore creatively, I could speak creatively, is the more that we'll be able to use it. And I think that's really that's just fuel to the fire in terms of how the work we can produce in partnership with people like ACNE. I just said that there.
Excellent. I think it is important that Elaine's point is well made as well about intuition and marketing, hunch marketing, if you like. I mean, it's easy to dismiss that and say, well, we have data now, and that's going to solve every problem because everything will be data informed. But you can't diminish the importance of instinct and gut and hunch in marketing. Now you have to prove the point. You still have to posit the theory, prove the point through data. But if you've got 20 years marketing experience and you've seen campaigns and you know it works, I know a lot of clients I talk to, they say the data is really useful, but actually at the end of the day, if it doesn't feel right, I'm not going to do it. And they're not wrong, because 20 years of marketing experience will teach you what's likely to work and not. So I don't think we should rush to this we'll get the data and everything has to be validated through data and things like that. We still have skills and talents which are much more qualitative as marketers, and I think we shouldn't stop trusting ourselves and trusting our guts to an extent.
But it's even with that hunch, there's just that element of, I suppose, to build on that, it's like building allies. So the more, if I want to do something and I have this hunch and then I validate it with data, and then I can use that data to talk about, it just goes into everything. Then it's like media.
You're more credible. Yeah.
I can defend it in front of my CFO. I can, so suddenly it's very much kind of a 360 approach, where first party data is a huge part of that, but agility.
I think for me, one of the big roles we have is that we tend to be much more external focused than a lot of other areas in our businesses. And I think that's a really, really valuable thing that not all marketeers and agencies in particular kind of fully realize the power of that, because I think a lot of the time you'll get into virtual meeting rooms as they are now, and there'll be a data point and an internal data point, and and everyone gets really excited by it, but a lot of the time it can be a really zoned in view of a specific piece of data point in our business, and then everyone go, okay, well, we'll just do that and it'll change everything. And I think having an external view to go, okay, but our competitors do that already, or there's this research, or we know this from our customers, or we know this from studies that like the one we're talking about today. I think that's a really valuable piece, because I think sometimes businesses can fall into the trap of kind of just believing their own kind of hype, and then they got the data to prove it, and then they launch it, and if no one kind of sense checks that with what's happening in the real world and externally, and I think that's one of the challenges of certainly being fully remote. I find personally is carving out that time to stay curious about what's happening out there in the world, and ensuring that you stay on top of trends and research and things that are happening outside of your category, outside of your industry, outside of your organization. Because then a lot of the time you can start with the hypothesis and then come back to say, does that feel right for our business? Does our data kind of back that up? And I think that's a really important role for us going forward. Super.
A question in from and we're coming to the end of this, but a question coming in from there's actually a few questions in our Q&A which are about some of the other trends that Tim just briefly whipped through, which I think is really interesting. One of them is purpose. And the question was, some brands have a noble purpose. A lot of others have had to invent one. Does the panel think all brands need a purpose? Is it not okay that sometimes we're just selling nappies? I'm not sure if that again comes from a nappy salesperson, but it's an interesting question, and maybe a nice one to kind of close up on. Can I throw that over to you, Elaine, maybe just to
I mean, I've got news for you. Your purpose is to sell nappies. And it's how you sell it maybe is the purpose. I think that customers are people too, and at the end of the day, consumers see through the crap. And I think that if you have a very credible purpose and you walk the walk in your product and how you talk about it and what you do and provide, I think your business will be all the better for it. A purpose isn't kind of something you put on a slide and then you file it away after you've either raised funding or you've done an event or something. But I think I think that a brand can, there's a reason why somebody's running the business the way that they are. Even if it is ultimately just to make money, how they're doing it will have the DNA of a purpose. And I think that pulling that out can be of benefit to the business. So if the question is, should you, I think you probably have a purpose, and it's about framing it, but ultimately the customer knows and sees through nonsense. So
I always say don't tell me you're funny, tell me a joke. And I think that's the problem a lot of brands make with purpose, is they're so eager to go, look, we've spent loads of money, we've distilled down to an amazingly sounding purpose, and now we're going to shove it into your face in an ad, as opposed to if you actually have an Elaine is right, you have one, whether and that could be making money or whatever it is, but but they should feel it through the experience to kind of go, well, it's a great website, it's a great service, it can be loads of X, Y, and Z. I totally understand. Like customers would feel it and they know. So I'd always say, look, purpose is a very powerful thing, particularly in service industries. If you can get your employees feeling that they are working on, on a mission, on something that is over and above just clocking in 9 to 5, so they're not transacting. That's a really powerful thing and customers will feel that when they call the call center or go onto the website or whatever. And I think if you can do that in your business, you will unlock growth. The difference is you don't have to shove it down people's throats. If you have it, it'll eventually make its way out through how people consume your brand. And I think that's what's important.
I think Elaine's point there, it can be how you do something rather than the why, because I think people go hunting for the big kind of profound why quite a lot, whereas the how is just as distinctive. Jimmy, last word from you on purpose.
I mean, Tim's data talks about this as well. Like companies with a purpose do better. We know that. But I think there's another thing I'm just bigging up your work here, Tim. But like there is another thing in there about being authentic. If you have a purpose, and it makes sense. If you're Patagonia and you have a theory about the environment, or a view on the environment and environmental degradation, that makes sense. But if you're selling nappies and it's just nappies, and that's probably a bad example because it's a very emotional kind of space. But actually, if you have a purpose, have one. If you paste a purpose onto some corporate entity, consumers will see through it in about 3 seconds. So, but like we can't get away from the fact that the companies that perform better, the high performance companies that Tim talks about in the study, they tend to have a purpose, and they tend to live it as well. So that's if you got to flaunt it.
Great. Listen, I think we're at the end of our time, so I'm going to hand back over to Claire. That was a really great discussion, and thanks also to everyone in the audience who sent through questions. I know there was a lot more that we didn't get to, but I think that was terrific. So thanks everybody.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.
So thanks a million, Dylan, and thank you to the panelists for that brilliant conversation. It's good when you forget you're hosting. Unsurprisingly, we didn't get through all of the questions, so we'll do our best to follow up where possible. The panel spoke a good bit there about value exchange, and our value exchange to you today for your time is to send on the full report and recording of today's session. And I'd really encourage you to take a look at that report. There's such a depth of insight and research to support those hunches or questions you may have around trends you're seeing. Just to say, we're planning more events like this in the future, so more to follow on that. And I guess related to the planning of those future events would be sending a short feedback form on today's event. It'd be really helpful to get your feedback. And just to say then finally, on behalf of Deloitte Digital, the Marketing Institute of Ireland, ACNE, and all our speakers, I'd like to say a massive thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day and hope to see you all soon for the next event, possibly even in person. Many thanks.